When Michael Taylor, the reclusive millionaire, walked into Vittoria dealership disguised as an ordinary man, he had no idea how much that experience would change his view of people and, more importantly, of himself. What he discovered in that luxurious showroom went far beyond what he expected, and the final revelation would leave everyone, especially a certain manager, in shock. Michael Taylor always preferred the peace of his mansion in the São Paulo countryside over the hustle and bustle of the big city. The millionaire lifestyle wasn't exactly what he had envisioned when he started his journey in the tech world. At 45 years old, his fortune had already surpassed billions, but financial success couldn't erase the bitter taste the superficiality of the world around him left. Those who knew him closely knew he was a simple man with solid values, who valued character more than appearances. And it was precisely this aversion to ostentation that led him to make a radical decision: to hide his identity and test the true nature of people. The idea started taking shape after a series of frustrating encounters with people who, upon discovering his wealth, instantly changed their tone and way of treating him. Michael wanted to know if the respect he received was genuine or just another mask worn by those around him. So, he decided to carry out a social experiment. Michael chose Vittoria dealership as the setting, one of the most renowned in São Paulo, known for selling luxury cars to the city's elite. The plan was simple. He would disguise himself as an ordinary man, wearing simple clothes, an old cap and worn-out shoes, and observe how he would be treated by the dealership employees. If people were truly fair, they should treat him the same way they would any other customer, regardless of his appearance. On the day of the experiment, Michael drove into the city in an old car, a popular model no longer seen frequently on the streets. As he parked in front of Vittoria dealership, he felt a mix of anxiety and curiosity. The windows gleamed in the sunlight, showcasing car models that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Michael adjusted the cap on his head, took a deep breath, and entered. The dealership's interior was even more impressive than he had imagined. The polished marble floor reflected the luxurious cars, each shining with an almost otherworldly glow. Modern chandeliers hung from the ceiling, softly illuminating the space. But what caught Michael's attention the most was the air of exclusivity permeating the place. Every detail seemed carefully designed to create a sense of opulence. As soon as he stepped into the showroom, Michael noticed the curious glances from the staff. He slowly walked between the cars, observing them, but was quickly ignored by Samantha Davis, the dealership manager, who was busy talking to a couple who had just entered. The woman, with her expensive clothes and sparkling jewelry, clearly garnered more interest from the manager than Michael in his disguise. Michael noticed how Samantha, with a broad smile and effusive gestures, gave her full attention to the couple, completely ignoring his presence. He approached one of the cars on display, a sporty sedan with leather and wood finishes, and ran his hand over the body, admiring its impeccable shine. It was then that Emily Scott, the sales assistant, approached with a professional but distant expression. "Can I help you?" Emily asked, in a neutral, almost indifferent tone. Michael smiled slightly, realizing that his appearance had indeed influenced the treatment he received. In a calm voice, and he replied, "I'm interested in learning more about this model. It's one of the new releases, right?" Emily nodded, but her explanation was brief and unenthusiastic. It was clear she didn't expect this simple-looking man to be able to afford one of the dealership's most expensive cars. Even so, Michael kept asking questions, testing the limits of the assistant's patience, who maintained the same mechanical and emotionless tone. Meanwhile, across the showroom, Daniel Parker, a young salesperson, was watching the situation. He was new to the dealership, but had already noticed how some of his colleagues treated customers based on their appearance. To Daniel, this was an affront to the values he had learned from his humble upbringing. Determined to do the right thing, he approached Michael with a genuine smile. "Hello, my name is Daniel. I see you're interested in this car. Can I help you with any additional information?" Daniel said in a welcoming tone. Michael looked up and saw the sincerity in Daniel's eyes. He nodded, surprised by the change in attitude, and replied, "Yes, I'd love to know more about this model. It looks like an incredible car." Daniel began explaining the vehicle's specifications enthusiastically, highlighting each detail with passion. as if presenting the car to an old friend. The interaction between the two caught Samantha's attention, who for a brief moment diverted her eyes from the wealthy couple and watched the scene with disdain. Michael sensed the shift in the showroom's atmosphere and, while listening to Daniel, made a mental note. The difference in treatment was clear, but there was still more to discover. He was only at the beginning of his experiment, and something told him that the most important revelations were yet to come. Michael felt increasingly intrigued as Daniel continued to explain the car's details. The young salesperson's passion was evident, and his attentive approach sharply contrasted with Emily's indifference and Samantha's disdain. The disguised millionaire began to understand just how deep the gap between the dealership employees' different attitudes ran. "You really know this car well, Daniel," Michael commented, impressed by the salesperson's knowledge. "What do you think about working together to find the perfect configuration?" Daniel smiled, surprised by Michael's genuine interest, and nodded. They headed to a corner table in the showroom, where Daniel turned on the computer to show the different customization options available. Michael watched the young man closely, analyzing every detail of his behavior. While Daniel explained the configuration possibilities, Michael noticed that Samantha was still paying close attention to the wealthy couple in the background, treating them with almost exaggerated deference. She followed them closely, showing each vehicle with enthusiasm, and even offering champagne to make the experience more enjoyable. The difference in treatment was glaring, and Michael knew this situation was revealing exactly what he feared: deeply rooted prejudice and superficiality in an environment that should be egalitarian. When Daniel finished presenting the options, Michael feigned indecision, as if weighing every detail. "I think I'll need some time to think it over," Michael said, watching Daniel's reaction. "Of course, sir," Daniel responded, still with a smile. "If you need anything else, I'll be around." Michael thanked him and stood up, walking through the showroom again. He felt Samantha's eyes following him as he approached another car, a luxury SUV on display near the entrance. The manager had finally noticed that the simple customer was taking more time than expected, and that Daniel, her new employee, had dedicated himself to him in an unexpected way. "This car is interesting," Michael said, more to himself than anyone else. Samantha, noticing that the wealthy couple was already satisfied with the options presented, approached Michael with a professional but forced smile. "This is one of our most popular models," Samantha said in a polished tone, but with a hint of condescension. "Can I help you with something?" Michael raised his eyebrows, noticing the change in attitude. He decided to keep his disguise and test how far the manager would go. "I was thinking about something more spacious for my family," Michael replied, pretending to analyze the SUV's interior. "I see." Samantha cast a quick glance at Daniel, still near the configuration table, before continuing. "This model is an excellent choice, but are you sure it's within your budget?" The question came with subtle acidity, almost imperceptible, but Michael didn't let it slide. "I think I can manage," Michael said, in a tone that made it clear he intended to keep playing the game. Samantha tried to hide her surprise, but Michael saw the flash of disdain cross her face. She offered a quick and superficial explanation about the car, much less detailed than the one Daniel had given earlier. Then she walked away with some excuse, returning to the wealthy couple, clearly more interested in securing a bigger sale. Michael felt a mix of frustration and sadness. As prepared as he was to face the reality of being judged by his appearance, Samantha's disdain affected him more than he cared to admit. But part of him also felt challenged. He was determined to continue the experiment, now even more interested in seeing just how far superficiality could go in that environment. As Michael wandered through the showroom, observing the other cars, he noticed Daniel being called to the meeting room by Samantha. Curious about what would happen, Michael discreetly approached the room door, keeping a distance that allowed him to listen without being noticed. "Daniel, we need to talk about how you spend your time with customers," Samantha began, her tone slightly irritated. "I was assisting Mr. Michael. He seemed genuinely interested in the car and—" "Do you really think that man can afford one of our luxury vehicles?" Samantha interrupted, not hiding her skepticism. "We can't afford to waste time on customers who clearly aren't on our level. We need to focus on those who can actually buy." I suggest you reevaluate your priorities if you want to stay here." Daniel remained silent for a moment, and Michael could imagine the internal conflict the young man was facing. It was evident that Daniel believed in treating everyone with respect, but he also knew his position at the dealership could be at risk. "With all due respect, Samantha, I believe all customers should be treated the same," Daniel finally said. "It doesn't matter how they dress or how much money they appear to have. If we're here to sell, we need to show that we're a dealership that values every person who walks through that door." Samantha let out an exasperated sigh, as if hearing something too naive to take seriously. "That sounds very nice in theory, Daniel, but here in the real world we need to be practical," Samantha replied with a cold look. "I'll let you continue your service, but don't expect the company to be as understanding if you don't close this sale." Daniel nodded, and Michael, satisfied with what he had heard, quietly walked away. He knew his true identity would eventually be revealed, but for now, he wanted to see how far Daniel would go in maintaining his principles in such a hostile environment. When Michael returned to the showroom, he found Daniel again. The young salesperson, despite the conversation he had just had, still maintained the same sincere smile. "So Mr. Michael had time to think about the car?" Daniel asked, in a genuine tone. "Yes, Daniel. I think I'm ready to make a decision," Michael replied, with a look that mixed gratitude and something more. He knew the moment of revelation was approaching, and it would bring consequences neither of them expected. Michael felt the weight of his decisions as he reflected on everything he had observed so far. The stark difference in the treatment he received from Samantha and Daniel was a clear reflection of the attitudes he feared encountering. Still, he felt encouraged by Daniel's integrity, a young man who, even under pressure, remained true to his values. Michael knew that the next step would be crucial for the outcome of his experiment. "Daniel, I've been thinking a lot," Michael began, taking his time to choose the right words. "I believe the SUV you showed me might be exactly what I'm looking for." Daniel smiled, but Michael noticed a slight tension in his eyes, likely a remnant of the conversation he had with Samantha. Even so, the young salesperson remained professional and dedicated. "I'm glad you liked the choice, Mr. Michael," Daniel responded, trying to hide his satisfaction at being close to making a significant sale. "Would you like to run a payment simulation, or is there something else I can show you before we decide?" Michael thought for a moment, remembering his initial purpose. He wanted to see how far Daniel would go with his approach, even knowing that he was being judged by his simple appearance. "I think a simulation would be helpful, yes," Michael replied, deciding to extend the interaction a bit longer. While Daniel prepared the simulation, Michael observed the movement around him. Samantha remained focused on assisting the wealthy couple, and Emily seemed more apathetic than ever, as if merely going through the motions without really caring about what was happening around her. The atmosphere in the dealership was heavy, a mixture of pressure for results and disdain for those who didn't fit the idealized profile of a customer. When Daniel returned with the payment simulation, he sat beside Michael, showing him the different options. "Here are some financing possibilities, in case you opt for that route, or we can discuss a cash payment if that's of interest to you," Daniel explained, with the same dedication as always. Michael studied the numbers for a few moments before speaking again. "Actually, Daniel, I'm thinking of something different," he said, in a more serious tone. "What if I wanted to pay for this car in cash, today?" The silence that followed Michael's question was almost palpable. Daniel blinked, surprised, but quickly recovered. "Of course, Mr. Michael, we can do that, no problem. I'll prepare the necessary documents and—" he began, but was interrupted by Samantha, who had silently approached. "Cash!" she repeated, with an incredulous voice. Her eyes assessed Michael, as if trying to find some sign that he was joking or bluffing. "Are you seriously considering paying for this car in cash?" Michael realized that the challenge in her voice was almost offensive. He could have revealed his identity at that moment, but he decided to prolong the suspense, curious to see how far the situation would go. "Yes, I'm seriously considering it," Michael replied, keeping calm. Samantha frowned, clearly skeptical. She turned to Daniel, who looked at her with a mixture of concern and determination. "Daniel, can I speak to you for a moment?" Samantha requested, in a tone that suggested she wasn't really asking. The two stepped aside a few meters, and Michael watched as Samantha, with expressions of disbelief and frustration, tried to convince Daniel that he was wasting time with a customer who had no potential. Although he couldn't hear all the words, her tone was clear. This couldn't be true, and the customer couldn't afford to pay for that car in cash. Daniel, for his part, seemed conflicted. It was clear that he still believed in the customer in front of him, but the weight of Samantha's authority couldn't be ignored so easily. After a few minutes of tense conversation, they returned. "Mr. Michael, I just want to make sure you understand that this is one of our most expensive models," Samantha began, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're talking about a significant amount. Are you sure you want to proceed with this purchase?" Michael held her gaze for a moment before responding, feeling that this was the moment to take the next step in his plan. "Samantha, I appreciate your concern, but I believe I know what I'm doing," he said firmly. "If Daniel can prepare the papers, I'd like to finalize this purchase today." Samantha seemed about to protest again, but something in Michael's tone made her back down. She cast one last look of distrust at Daniel before stepping away, visibly irritated. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed a little more relieved, though still worried about the possible consequences. "I'll prepare the documents, Mr. Michael," he said with a nod. "It'll just take a few minutes." As Daniel walked away to arrange the paperwork, Michael allowed himself a moment of reflection. Samantha's irritation was evident, and he knew that his impending revelation would change everything. But he also felt a deep respect for Daniel, who had maintained his integrity despite the pressure. As soon as Daniel returned with the documents, Michael noticed that the showroom was quieter than before. Emily was assisting a distant customer, and Samantha kept her distance, watching everything with a hard expression. Michael calmly signed the papers, feeling the weight of each signature as a step closer to the final revelation. "All done, Mr. Michael. Everything is ready," Daniel said with a mix of relief and satisfaction. "The car will be yours as soon as we confirm the payment." Michael looked at the young salesperson, and a discreet smile appeared on his lips. "Daniel, before we proceed with the payment, there's something I need to tell you," he began, lowering his voice so that only Daniel could hear. Daniel's curious gaze met Michael's as the young salesperson waited for the next words, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Michael took a deep breath before continuing, aware that what he was about to say would completely change the dynamic between him, Daniel, and everyone at the dealership. "Daniel, before we finalize this, I need you to know who I really am," Michael began in a more serious tone. "My full name is Michael Taylor, and I'm the founder and CEO of Taylor Tech, one of the largest software companies in the country." Daniel blinked, clearly stunned by the revelation. He knew the name Taylor Tech. It was a company that dominated the technology market, and Michael Taylor himself was a well-known figure, though he kept a low profile in the media. The young salesperson was speechless for a moment, trying to process what he had just heard. Mr. Taylor, I had no idea," Daniel stammered, trying to comprehend the information. Michael placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, a gesture of empathy intended to reassure him. "I know, and that was exactly the point," Michael explained, with a soft smile. "I wanted to see how I would be treated without anyone knowing who I am or what I have. And you, Daniel, were the only one who treated me with the respect and dignity that everyone deserves, regardless of their appearance or what they seem to possess." Daniel still appeared shocked, but now there was a mixture of relief and pride in his eyes. He knew he had followed his principles, even in the face of pressure from his superiors. "Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I was just doing what I believe is right," Daniel finally said, regaining his composure. "And that's why I want to reward you," Michael continued. "I'm not only going to buy this car, but I'm also going to do something more. I see a lot of potential in you, Daniel, and I'd like to offer you an opportunity to grow in my company. What do you think about working with me at Taylor Tech? We could use someone with your integrity and work ethic." Daniel's mouth opened, surprised by the offer. It was an opportunity he had never imagined, and the idea of working directly with Michael Taylor, one of the country's greatest entrepreneurs, seemed almost surreal. "Mr. Taylor, I don't even know what to say," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is a dream come true. I accept. I absolutely accept." Michael smiled, pleased with the young man's reaction. He knew Daniel had a bright future ahead of him, and he was happy to help shape that future. "I'm glad to hear that, Daniel. Let's finish the car purchase, and then we'll discuss the details of your new position at Taylor Tech," Michael said, as he signed the last papers. Once the purchase process was completed, Michael looked around and noticed Samantha approaching, likely drawn by the commotion she had noticed between him and Daniel. When she arrived, Michael saw the curiosity and impatience on her face. "Is there a problem?" Samantha asked, looking from Michael to Daniel, trying to understand what had happened. Michael took a step forward, facing her with a firm, yet not hostile, gaze. "Samantha, I'm Michael Taylor," he said calmly. "And I just bought one of your cars in cash. Furthermore, I've just offered Daniel a position in my company. He has shown character and ethics that I consider essential." Samantha's face paled, and for a moment, she seemed not to believe what she was hearing. Her eyes widened in surprise and then in understanding as she realized who was standing before her. The confident posture she had maintained throughout the interaction crumbled, giving way to an expression of embarrassment. Mr. Taylor, Samantha tried to find the words, but her voice faltered. Michael interrupted her gently but firmly. "Samantha, what I witnessed here today was disappointing," he said bluntly. "What Daniel did was the minimum expected of any employee in any position, treating all customers with respect. You, on the other hand, showed that you judge people by their appearance, something that should have no place in any business, especially in a luxury dealership like this one." Samantha opened her mouth to protest, but quickly closed it, knowing that any attempt at defense would be futile in the face of the situation. "I'm not someone who typically exposes these incidents publicly, but I believe lessons need to be learned," Michael continued. "I will report this experience to the dealership's management, and I expect measures to be taken so that this doesn't happen again. Every customer, regardless of how they present themselves, should be treated with the same level of attention and respect." Samantha could only nod, defeated. She knew her career at Vittoria dealership could be hanging by a thread, and all because of her own prejudice. Michael, sensing the manager's discomfort, decided to end the conversation politely. "I wish you all the best, Samantha," he said, as he began to walk away. "And remember, never underestimate someone based on their appearance. It can cost much more than a sale." As Michael walked toward the exit, Daniel followed, feeling a mix of relief and excitement for the future ahead. The young man knew he was about to embark on a new phase of his life, something he could never have imagined that morning. "Daniel, I'll see you at Taylor Tech," Michael said with one last smile. "Get ready for new challenges." Daniel nodded, still astonished by the turn of events. As Michael left the dealership, feeling the sun on his face and a sense of satisfaction from conducting the experiment, he knew he had achieved what he set out to do, to discover the truth about how people treated him when his wealth wasn't a factor. But most importantly, he had found someone he could trust and help grow. As Michael got into his old car, he knew that while wealth could hide people's true nature, it could also reveal those who truly deserved to prosper. And on that day, Michael was certain he had made the right choice. Michael drove his old car through the busy streets of the city, reflecting on the events he had just experienced at Vittoria dealership. While he was satisfied with the outcome and with Daniel's integrity, part of him couldn't help but feel a twinge of disillusionment. He had always known that prejudice and superficiality were common, but seeing them in action, especially in an environment that should value excellence in service, was a sobering reminder of human flaws. Meanwhile, at Vittoria dealership, the atmosphere was tense. Samantha was visibly shaken after Michael's revelation. The certainty that her behavior could be reported to the dealership's management left her uneasy. She knew her professional future was at risk. Emily, who had remained on the sidelines of the events, now observed everything with a mix of concern and resignation. What had started as an ordinary day at the dealership was now taking unexpected proportions. However, the deepest impact was felt by Daniel. He was still processing the offer Michael had made him. The possibility of working at Taylor Tech, one of the largest technology companies in the country, was something he had never imagined, especially coming from such a humble background. The young salesperson knew he was about to embark on a new phase in his life, but he was also aware that this meant leaving behind everything he had built at the dealership. As Daniel finished organizing the paperwork for the car sale, he noticed Emily approaching with a serious expression on her face. "Daniel, can we talk for a minute?" Emily asked, her voice low but loaded with concern. "Of course, Emily. What happened?" Daniel replied, sensing that something was wrong. Emily hesitated for a moment before speaking, as if carefully choosing her words. "I just want you to know that I'm happy for you, for the opportunity you've been given," she began, avoiding direct eye contact with Daniel. "But you need to be aware that things could change drastically for us here at the dealership. Samantha is in a delicate situation, and you know how she can react when she feels threatened." Daniel frowned, not fully understanding where Emily was going with this. "What do you mean by that, Emily?" he asked, trying to grasp the subtext. Emily sighed and finally looked him in the eyes. "Samantha is not someone who easily accepts defeat," she explained, with a somber tone. "She may try to blame you for what happened today, for not following her orders, and honestly, I don't know how far she might go to save her own skin." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine at those words. He knew that Samantha was ambitious and often ruthless when it came to maintaining her position. However, he had never imagined she might try to use the situation to hurt him. "Emily, I only did what I thought was right," Daniel said, trying to defend himself. "I couldn't treat Mr. Taylor any differently just because he didn't look wealthy. That goes against everything I believe in." Emily nodded, but her expression remained worried. "I understand, Daniel," she said, her voice softer, "but I'm just saying you should be careful. You have a bright future ahead of you, especially now that you'll be working at Taylor Tech. Don't let Samantha or anyone else ruin that for you." Daniel pondered Emily's words and knew she was right to warn him. He had always valued integrity and honesty, but now he realized that in the corporate world, those values weren't always enough to protect against those who prioritized self-preservation above all. Meanwhile, Michael continued his journey back home, still reflecting on the next steps. He was eager to start working with Daniel, but he also knew he needed to address the issue at the dealership. The experience had exposed a significant flaw in customer service, and as someone who had always valued fairness and equality, he felt the need to take action. As soon as he arrived home, Michael went to his office and picked up the phone. He knew exactly who to contact to ensure the situation was handled properly. He called the director of the dealership network directly, an old friend of his, with whom he maintained a respectful relationship. "David, it's Michael Taylor. How are you?" Michael began after the initial greetings. "Michael, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. How's everything?" David responded cheerfully, unaware of what was coming. "Well, David, actually, I'm calling to discuss something serious," Michael said, adopting a more formal tone. "Today, I visited Vittoria dealership and had an experience that left me quite concerned. I need you to know what happened." David listened in silence as Michael described in detail what had occurred at the dealership, from Samantha's behavior to the way Daniel had handled the situation. The dealership director remained quiet for most of the conversation, but Michael could sense the seriousness with which David was absorbing the information. "Michael, I'm so sorry for what you went through," David finally said. "This doesn't reflect the values we want for our company. I promise you I'll investigate this thoroughly and take the necessary measures. Thank you for bringing this to my attention." Michael felt a sense of relief hearing David's response. He knew his friend was a man of his word and trusted that appropriate actions would be taken. "Thank you, David. I just wanted to make sure this situation doesn't happen again," Michael said, concluding the conversation. After hanging up the phone, Michael leaned back in his chair, feeling satisfied for having done what he considered right. He knew that Samantha would have to face the consequences of her actions, but he also hoped that the lesson would serve to improve customer service in all the dealerships in the network. As the night fell, Michael began thinking about the next steps with Daniel. He was excited about the idea of working with someone who shared his vision of integrity and respect. Taylor Tech was a company that valued these principles, and Michael was confident that Daniel would be a valuable addition to the team. But deep down, Michael knew that the story with Vittoria dealership wasn't entirely over. He had the feeling that something more was coming, something that could test everything he and Daniel believed in. The following week was a roller coaster of emotions for Daniel. After Michael's phone call to David, the dealership network director, the atmosphere at Vittoria dealership changed drastically. The news that Michael Taylor, the founder of Taylor Tech himself, had visited the store disguised as a regular customer, spread quickly among the employees. The revelation brought with it a wave of tension and anxiety. Samantha, who until then had maintained an unshakable air of authority, seemed on the verge of collapse. Her superiors, alerted by David, had launched an investigation into the incident, and the manager knew her career was hanging by a thread. Each day at the dealership became a nightmare, with Samantha desperately trying to justify herself and find ways to minimize the impact of her mistakes. She was more distant than ever, avoiding long conversations and focusing only on the essentials. Emily, on the other hand, seemed to have adopted a more cautious stance. She knew the environment was changing, and despite her previous behavior, she began treating customers with more attention, perhaps motivated by the fear that something similar could happen to her. But Emily also observed Daniel with a mix of curiosity and admiration. The young salesperson, who had remained true to his principles, was now about to leave the dealership for a bright new opportunity. Finally, the day of Daniel's farewell arrived. He was in the showroom, packing his things, when Michael walked through the door, this time without any disguise. His presence caused an immediate stir, and all eyes turned toward him. Michael walked up to Daniel with a warm smile, ignoring the curious glances from the other employees. "Ready to start your new journey?" Michael asked as he shook Daniel's hand. "More than ready, Mr. Taylor," Daniel replied with a smile that reflected both excitement and nervousness. Michael nodded, satisfied with the answer. He then turned to the other dealership employees, who were now gathered around, clearly waiting to hear what he had to say. "I would like to thank all of you for the work you do here," Michael began, his voice calm but firm. "However, it's important to remember that every customer who walks through these doors deserves the same respect and attention, regardless of their appearance. This is something that should be practiced every day by every one of you." Samantha, who was standing on the sidelines, seemed ready to speak but hesitated. Michael gave her a brief, meaningful look before continuing. "I know mistakes were made, but I'm certain we've learned from this experience," he said, addressing everyone. "Samantha, I hope you can take this as a lesson and use this opportunity to grow and improve. We all have the capacity to change and become better." Samantha slowly nodded, visibly shaken, but trying to maintain her composure. She knew that from that moment on, every step she took would be closely watched, and her actions would be judged by a higher standard. After the brief speech, Michael turned his attention back to Daniel. "Let's go, Daniel. We have a long road ahead," he said, signaling that it was time to leave. As they walked toward the exit, Daniel paused, turning to take one last look at the dealership, where he had spent the past few months. Despite all the difficulties, this place had been where he started his career, and part of him knew he was leaving behind an important chapter of his life. "Emily, it was a pleasure working with you," Daniel said with a sincere smile. "I wish you all the best moving forward." Emily, surprised by the personal farewell, smiled back. "Thank you, Daniel. You too," she replied, with an expression that mixed gratitude with a hint of sadness. Daniel and Michael left the dealership together, and as they crossed the parking lot, Michael stopped for a moment, turning to the young salesperson. "Daniel Baum, I know this change might seem scary, but trust me, you're more than prepared," Michael said, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "At Taylor Tech, we value people like you, who have integrity and understand that respect isn't something you buy, but something you earn every day." Daniel smiled, feeling more confident with Michael's words. "I'm ready for this, Mr. Taylor," Daniel replied with determination. "And please, call me Michael," Michael corrected with a smile. "We're a team now." The two got into the car, and as they drove away from Vittoria dealership, Daniel felt a mixture of relief and excitement. He was leaving behind an environment where his ethics and values had been tested to the limit, but he was heading towards something bigger, where he could grow and develop even further. He knew that, under Michael's guidance, he had the opportunity to make a difference in a world that often seemed to care more about appearances than what really mattered. As they drove toward the future, Michael and Daniel began discussing plans for the new job, with Michael sharing his vision for the future of Taylor Tech and how Daniel could contribute to that mission. For Daniel, it was more than just a new job. It was the chance to build something meaningful, alongside someone he respected and admired. And so, the young salesperson who had started the day not knowing his world was about to change, now found himself on the path to a promising future, guided by a mentor who saw in his integrity the true value of a human being. Michael Taylor, in turn, had found more than a loyal employee. He had found a kindred spirit, someone who shared his vision of a world where character mattered more than any material wealth. As Michael's car pulled away from the dealership, leaving behind the lessons learned and challenges overcome, a new journey was beginning, one that would not be measured solely by financial success, but by the positive impact they could have on the lives of those around them. And in that moment, both knew they were exactly where they needed to be. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing to our channel and supporting us through the thanks button. Until next time.